Whisperer fans. It is DNC Convention Week, and I bet you've been having a great time watching all your favorite Democratic superstars do their little convention stuff. Now, I have to tell you, I can survive with a fake convention that's done on Zoom. It's not a big deal. The thing that I do miss, though, are all the old ladies and old dudes that wear the stupid hats and do the stupid dancing. To confess, I really love that. And also, it gives me such great lecture fodder. I always love showing my students little segments of the dancing. And I would have the Republican dancers like face off to the Democratic dancers. And my students would decide which dancers were better that year. So it's kind of going to be cheating to not have that for 2020, frankly. But I'll survive. So I hope you're having a good week. This convention special, obviously, was going to be, you're going to see, cut over time, over a few different days and a few different versions of Rachel. So you're just going to have to roll with that. I'm pulling together a couple of different interviews in this convention special and covering a few different topics. We're going to start off with a great interview with Jessica Post. And Jessica is in charge of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. What? You've never heard of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee? That's sad. And that's why Jessica's on the show and also getting this premiere intro spot where people are more likely to see her. And that's because Democrats are trying really hard to flip several state legislative houses and chambers this election cycle. And if they're able to do so, because it happens to be the year that the census is getting done and reapportionment and redistricting is going to occur, they can actually use that power to subvert GOP gerrymanders. Do you know what a gerrymander is, right? And you hate them, yes? So you really do want to be paying attention to these state legislative races. Democrats have on this map, Michigan, Arizona, Texas, North Carolina, Iowa, all across in these amazing states, they have really competitive state legislative cycles, and they don't get any love. In fact, the last time our fundraising data was published, the Dlcc got lapped by the Republican version of it in fundraising. So why don't we take a pause? Everybody go to the Dlcc website right now and make a donation so that doesn't happen again. Because it's super, super embarrassing and sad. Super sad. I'm crying. You don't want to make Rachel cry. Okay? So we're going to talk about state legislative races and how the Republican Party used control of state legislatures to totally dominate your lives and how you don't want that to happen anymore. So you go make that donation. And Jessica's going to walk through her job there. She took over in 2016 in January, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, thinking, I'll just go through and we'll elect Hillary Clinton and have a great cycle. And it didn't work out like that. But she has had a lot of legislative election success. Could be more useful if she had more money. And I think she wants to tell you about that organization and what it does and how it does it. And I think you really want to spend some time on the Google machine after this episode, Googling up something called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and what it does and how it does it like a ruthless, clean, lean GOP campaign machine. Organization is just one of the many things that the GOP does better, state legislative election dominance. And Jessica's job is to help kind of catch Democrats up in that area. So it's a tough job. I think it's a great interview, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everybody, welcome back. I am so excited to finally have Jessica Post on the show. I have been talking about having her on for quite a while, and as you know, we walked through a little bit about state legislative politics, why it's so important, how Republicans do it a little bit differently than Democrats. And so now we're going to have Jessica Post on to do the big interview and talk a little bit about what she's been doing so successfully with her steerage of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee and where it's going in this election cycle. So Jessica, welcome on the show.
Thanks so much, Dr. B. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, it's my privilege to have you on the show. Again, Jessica Post is the president of the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. That acronym, in case you're trying to Google it, is DLCC. And so this is one of the Democratic Party's major committees, actually. And it's probably one you haven't heard all that much about, unfortunately. Something that I'm kind of hoping to change a little bit with this show. This is a major legislative election committee of the Democratic Party. So you've heard of the DCC and the DSCC. The DCC focuses on House races, and the DSCC focuses on Senate races. Well, what the DLCC focuses on are state legislative races. And Jessica, under her steerage, has been running this committee for a while now. When did you start exactly, Jessica?
I started in January of 2016.
Yeah, so here she comes in. Tell us a little bit about coming in January 16, and it's that's the beginning of the election year. So I actually probably suspect you came in with pretty high hopes, huh?
Yes. Well, I actually was a junior staffer at Dlcc. I was the national field director in 2010 and 2012. So I saw a lot of these losses firsthand, and I really saw there just wasn't as much of a national focus on state legislative races. I ran and started Focus 2020, which was a state legislative focused program at Emily's List. And then the board asked me to interview and come back. And I knew that we had to do a few things. One, we had to increase resources to compete with the Republicans, but we also had to tell our story and make sure that we were able to compete with to compete with the Republicans at the state legislative level and get Democrats across the country really to understand the importance of state legislative chambers. A lot of our folks in states like Wisconsin and Ohio and Virginia, had been involved in state legislative chambers, but a lot of our Democratic donors who live in these blue islands of San Francisco or New York or anywhere sort of progressive across the country may not have been read in. So we had to do a lot of educational work. And so in 2016, we thought, we'll flip a bunch of chambers. This is going to be a great year. And we did. We flipped the Nevada House and Senate, the New Mexico State House, and the Alaska House, red to blue, in a power sharing agreement. But we lost the Kentucky House and also the Iowa State Senate, which was a tough year for us. It was definitely a tough cycle. And I think, you've certainly written about this. We definitely started to see at our level the true sort of political polarization of the electorate in these districts. In places where we had to overperform Secretary Clinton by 30 points in many cases that had been democratically held.
Yeah, that's amazing. We're going to dig into that in a minute. This why a Democratic state legislative candidate would need to overperform Secretary Clinton by that kind of margin to win in a race in the state legislature. So we'll come back to that for sure. So you come in. It's January 2016. You go through your first year of the 2016 cycle up to the minute of 8 o'clock in the Javits Center. Everyone expects Clinton's going to win that race, and then you come into the next day, and there's a lot of reasons to be sad in that moment. But for me, I'm already looking through that week, and oh man, there's going to be a major blowback to this election, and that's where my theory starts to be born. And one of the ways that I knew it would be born was in that 2017 election in Virginia. And I assume that was the first project that you were really looking at too, other than 2016. So tell me about 2017 in Virginia.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly there were two big objectives in 2017. One thing a lot of people haven't written about is we flipped the Washington State Senate red to blue in fall of 2017 also. And that was a huge election for us. We were trying to figure out, does the electorate change? The electorate in 2017 and in off years in Virginia had been much more conservative. And so we looked at Washington, where we needed one seat to flip the chamber. And we spent a lot of resources flipping a district that had been held by a Republican for a really long time, red to blue, with a woman named Manka Dhingra. In Virginia, one of the things that was so incredible was seeing a number of these groups come into the state legislative space and support the work. And so we were able to make significant investments and then support the Virginia House Caucus through the recount. There are things, I went and door knocked for Jennifer Carroll Foy in Northern Virginia at the end of the cycle. And there were things that I had never seen before at the state legislative level. 200 volunteers that had come down from New Jersey, a state that also had elections that year, with Indivisible, knocking doors. For me, it was just incredible to see all of these new groups and so many people involved in state legislative campaigns and really understand the impact. There were one of our partner sister district made t-shirts with the names of the women's state legislative candidates. And in those blue islands, like San Francisco, you had women wearing t-shirts that said like Jennifer, Hala, Elizabeth, and so many of the women that won. So it's very cool for me to see, as someone who'd been involved in state legislative races for a long time, this increased support. And then the huge win, obviously, gaining so many seats to be able to expand Medicaid in Virginia on the East Coast, flipping the Washington State Senate on the West Coast. And then the Washington State Senate passed a slew of good policies throughout 2018. And that really kept my tank going to be able to continue to do this work.
Yeah, it's really cool because again, the audience for the show is hearing my perspective of that 17 cycle, coming from within the state, coming from a pollster, but also, this beginning of a theory that would turn into a forecast, and, seeing it from this weird academic, forecast election analysis perspective. And it's really neat to hear too how, Democrats start to realize, okay, we've got this donation resource advantage that we're not deploying well, and we should be deploying it more effectively by getting people to buy in to the value of out of district or out of area races, and why it's important for them to invest there and feel a connection to, why flipping the Virginia legislature matters at a national level, right? And it's kind of cool because I as certainly as a researcher, I knew that there was a thing called a sister district advocacy group, and I understood that to be a sign of increased enthusiasm, right? But to hear how it plays out qualitatively with the other side was kind of interesting. So, and then of course in the Virginia cycle, what happened with your efforts? You guys ended up doing and bearing fruit, right?
Yeah, we made one of the things we did in Virginia is we had run a number of special elections in 2019, and there was a special election in Delaware to make sure that we held the Delaware State Senate. And I remember there were 1,000 volunteers that had come down from around the area for this Delaware State Senate race. So many volunteers that during GOTV, you almost could have put a lawn chair outside of a person you were trying to get to vote, and like volunteers sit in the person's driveway.
Like the leftovers.
Yes, like 1-to-1. Exactly. Like, when are you gonna come home? So so we knew early in Virginia, we won a lot of special elections actually in 2018, and so we knew that there were huge numbers of volunteers starting out. So one of the things we said to the folks in Virginia is we'll make early investments in field infrastructure, because look, the thing that's happening all across the country that you're not seeing is thousands of volunteers are showing up in campaign offices. And many of these campaigns were not engineered for out-of-state volunteers. We hadn't sort of seen that before, except for maybe in the Wisconsin recall elections at the state legislative level. So we had to create that campaign capacity. So when 1,000 volunteers came to Northern Virginia, the bus showed up in Woodbridge, they were able to give them the packets. Same situation in Washington. We made the same level of investments out there. And then the other thing, I think for example, at the beginning of the cycle, we weren't sure if we should normally you would say, okay, the election just happened, donors are complacent. So we had a plan, like a digital investment plan for Clinton winning. And instead I said to our digital person, I'm like, not totally sure what's going on, but I know that there's women marching in the streets right now. So I think we definitely need to try to acquire more email addresses. It seems to me that there's a lot of new people getting involved. And then I was experiencing that anecdotally, tons of unsolicited Facebook messages from old friends. I was showing up in places and, our phones were ringing off the hook. I was getting a ton of emails. People just wanted to know what they could do. So I think experiencing that in my personal network also is really helpful.
Well, that's really fascinating. And so between this 17 cycle, you guys end up, I moved to Virginia in 2015. It's got, I think, 3 of the 11 or maybe 4 of the 11 members of the House of Representatives are Democrats. It's true statewide they're winning because statewide you can't gerrymander it, right? So they have Democratic governor, two Democratic senators, but anything that could be sliced and diced, they're struggling on. And the state house, they're 33, I think, seats away from a majority. And that 2017 cycle, they end up picking up 17 or 15 seats. I can't remember if it was 17 or 15.
I feel like I should know this. It's 15 or 17. Yeah, I know that we picked up a ton of seats. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I know.
It was a lot. So anyway, the point is they go from this the distant minority to okay, the next cycle is going to be this off year, because it's always an off year for state legislative elections in Virginia, but one of the years is the gubernatorial cycle, and then the other year is a really, really off year. It's a nothing but state legislative cycle. And so they go from this distant minority to only needing, they close more than half the distance in that one cycle. And so that 2019 cycle, you guys come back to Virginia, and you are, you need another a handful of states to pick up the state house, because the courts have intervened in the state after 8 years of litigation. They have finally, shot down these racial gerrymanders that the Republican Party used to dominate the state for, more than half a decade. And so they've court ordered some redistricting maps that are going to pick up another, 5 or 6 districts for Democrats. And then they have to pick up the rest electorally, right? And then they also are within shouting distance of a Senate map that has a Senate majority. It's never been subjected to this new electorate that's really jazzed up about Donald Trump. So tell me a little bit about Virginia last year.
Yeah, a huge election cycle. And I think concurrently in 17 and 18, we were rebuilding DLCC. So we were able to come into Virginia in December of 2018. We made $1 million commitment to the state because exactly what you said, we knew that the maps on the House side had been redrawn, and that was absolutely an improvement. It made the chamber much more winnable. And then the Senate maps, we knew that they were very close. There had been a number of Republican retirements, folks like Dick Black, who we'd been trying to beat for a long time. And a lot of the Northern Virginia voters didn't even believe he could be that bad and still represent the area. So a number of open seats really set us up for victory in the Senate. So we felt really good. So we made that initial commitment, and then we were now in a position to be the center of gravity in Virginia. And obviously, after the things happened with the top of the ticket, we commissioned a statewide poll that continued to show paths to victory, because the Republicans were trying to say, with everything that's happened at the top of the ticket, there's no way that they can flip the Virginia legislature. So we had to do a lot of work to change that narrative to make sure that people in the state especially believed that we could flip the state legislature red to blue with everything that had happened, and having a governor not.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Yes, I remember. Yeah. Because of course, my own polling and my own work was like, the problem for Republicans to capitalize on a scandal like that, one must also have clean hands on race, right? One must not have much dirtier hands on the topic, like any scandal, right? Whatever it would be. One cannot, if you're going to capitalize on a scandal party, any topic, you can't, lob bombs at a party on a topic for which your record is much, much worse on that topic. So it's a classic example of failing to be able to capitalize on a political opportunity because your own party is much, much worse on it. Yeah.
Real House of Glass situation. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, and my own commentary in the state was very clear that Donald Trump backlash much greater than Ralph Northam 1960s scandal. So
yeah, for sure. And I think the other factor, I know you've talked a lot about anti-Trump driving turnout, which I totally agree. But it also drove an increase, and I think you've talked about this too, increasing contributions in a huge way, and also volunteers. So we had volunteers able to talk to people and make sure that they were making a plan to vote, especially as the election laws were still pretty restrictive in Virginia in 2017 and 2019.
Yeah, yeah. And so they flip this chamber, and I talk a little bit about this in the prologue to the show, and like the thing with the state politics, these state level gubernatorial and state legislative places, is there's no filibuster, and generally speaking, these governmental agencies or entities are still functional, unlike our federal government. So Democrats use that power to make sensible gun reform, liberalize small L, the voting access laws, and generally just pass logjam legislation that the public in Virginia had long been supportive of, minimum wage increase, that the Republicans had used their power in the state legislature to stymie. So all right, so now looking forward, you guys have laid all this groundwork since Trump's election. You've picked up seats here and there, and so you stand poised to do the same thing, or at least partially take over some one chamber of several states. Lay us out where you're on the offensive here in 2020.
Well, thank you. Yes, since in 2016, we flipped 10 chambers red to blue, including the 2 in Virginia, and then we flipped 450 seats red to blue. So we feel really good going in.
Yeah. I mean, that's half of what the Obama era lost, which was, by the way, double the normal, like the average, erosion a president's party suffers in the state legislature. The only time other than Obama's tenure that we've seen a 800 seat, there's 2 times. It was way back in the Eisenhower period. And then there was a time period, the Nixon time period. And when we think about Obama's time period, there's no logical explanation. There's no scandal. There's no, thing that occurs. You could argue the recession, the economy was not receding, but the perception was bad because how effective the right is on messaging. But I argue it's the technique that Republicans use to electioneer, which I talk about in the other part of the episode. But yeah, so half of the erosion is fixed, and in 2020, tell us a bit about where you guys are on the offensive to gain back some of that other erosion.
For sure. I mean, quite a bit of that, of course, was gerrymandering. One of the things that we had not seen in 2010 was, as you talk about the extreme partisanship. And if you look at the numbers after the 2010 election cycle, we actually held things closer. It's really in 2014 where you saw the gerrymandered maps really take effect, 2012, 2014. But looking at 2018, we flipped a lot of seats. And so they got us a lot closer, similar to what you talked about in 2017 in Virginia, where we gained seats. It set up the table for 2019. We did the same thing in 2018 to set the table for 2020. So going west to east, we're really excited about the Arizona State House and State Senate. We're only 2 seats away from flipping the Arizona House, 3 seats away from flipping the Arizona State Senate. It's a barn burner. Well, it was a barn burner, but now at least Mark Kelly has taken the Senate race. So that's and then of course the presidential. Arizona also has excellent voting laws. To begin with, a lot of people voted by mail. There's a permanent early vote list in the state, so that's very helpful in these times. So Arizona's looking very good. Texas, where we only need 9 seats. You talked about this. Beto O'Rourke won all of those seats on the path to victory. We also have seen a exodus at the state legislative level where there's been a number of Republican retirements. And this is definitely a place where the Republicans are trying to put their firewall up. Karl Rove is involved with the effort to defend the Texas State House. So it's definitely.
Oh, is he? Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, he's running. Well, 2 things have happened. One, he's running a specific PAC to protect Texas. There's a lot of keep Texas language, which I think is
yeah.
And then in addition to that, he's involved with, or he's joined the Republican State Leadership Committee's board as well. He became involved with that again. So the Republicans really know the stakes are very high this election cycle, and they're doing.
Oh yes, no, that will make my trip to Texas 10 times funner. I'll try my best to track down Mr. Rove.
Yes, media savvy, right? So.
That's awesome. And what about North Carolina? I mean, so here's the thing with Texas, right? It's if you take that state house down there, you break the gerrymander. It's one of the worst in the country. So like that's really why I'm going down there too, is to talk about the context of that gerrymander down there. Because that was big news 10 years ago for people who are old enough to remember the Tom DeLay, gerrymander breaking up of Austin into 5 districts to punish it for not being cooperative to the Republican Dominion. So I love the idea that Rove's down there playing that. That will make it much more fun. So
He definitely is. Yeah, and the governor's all in to protect the majority. In North Carolina, and the obviously the goal there for your listeners is, or and viewers, is to make sure that we have a lever of power in Texas for redistricting.
Yeah.
yes, I mean it's just critical, right? Because Texas, I mean, this time around is going to come really close. It could, if there wasn't so much other stuff that needed to be shored up and defended. It could, because of the pandemic screw up. If the messaging was on point, like Texas could flip, right? With money and message, I mean that's all it would take. But it is the way to hobble the GOP in the future. I mean, you kneecap them at Texas, and they really are struggling unless they reset themselves in terms of the small tent. They'd have to abandon the small tent strategy. They'd have to go Big Ten. So Texas is an important investment, I would argue.
Absolutely. And I think having a lever of power to stop rollbacks of voting laws and others.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could, you need to stymie them in that state house. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the Texas House Speaker is incredibly powerful. The Speaker does the committee assignments for both the Republicans and the Democrats. So having a Democratic Speaker, it's even more power than in many other state houses because of committee assignments.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's good to know.
It should be. The challenge with Texas, right, is like it's incredibly expensive. Like and this may be new, but to some of your viewers, but state legislative districts, the sizes are different all across the country because of the sizes of states, and so these districts are both ground game districts, but they're also they're on broadcast TV.
Right.
But the opportunity is that it's a realignment hotspot, right? I mean, the reason I was able to identify it a year out is that it's got this, it's Dallas, it's Houston, it's Austin, it's San Antonio, all of these suburban areas that have these millennials and diversity in these suburbs. And then these independents who are, they could be much more grossed out about the Republican Party with the right messaging approach. And what it just needs is money and investment and good messaging. That's all it needs. Just sitting there it's like having really good ingredients and it just needs the right chef,
Yes, and the candidates are great also. I mean, there's great Elizabeth Beck, Kiki Williams. There's women.
Right.
Oh, some great candidates too. Yeah, no doubt. It's already got that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another key ingredient. So that's huge. So a huge opportunity. And,
Yeah.
We're excited about it. And Beto couldn't be more involved. I mean, I'll give him a ton of credit. He's on the ground raising money. He would be out there knocking doors if it was safe.
Right.
He's truly done everything he can to mobilize his network. I mean, it's been very impressive.
No doubt. I'm super jazzed that Beto has decided to team up with my episode down there, help shine a light on some of these candidates and these races down there, and get my viewers into some of the hottest races down there because of the validity of them and because it's just unknown territory. I mean, a lot of the reasons that we don't really know much about their capability is that they haven't been invested in before. And this is going to be a massive, I think, a massive opportunity to see what they're capable of doing down there. So
it's absolutely right. It's a huge place to invest.
Yeah. And I will tell you this too, just in general, like within the Democratic coalition, and this even extends at least in our Virginia polling, where gerrymandering received a ton of voter education. So it's really shocking if you look through the Wasson Center survey database. We polled on redistricting
extensively. And when I came in and kind of took a look at our polling data on that, I was just really impressed, given how cynical I am about voter knowledge, at how much education our general electorate had about redistricting, and how supportive they were of reform. And so the fact is, I think there's a lot of possibility to get people jazzed about state legislative elections, especially on the topic of seeing control as a mechanism of ending gerrymandering.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I have to thank President Obama for stepping out on this issue. I think there's been so much public education about this issue. In part, so many people came to us and said, why don't we if we won the popular vote, why don't we control the US House of Representatives?
Right.
And there's certainly been like an American education about that, I think, since Trump, which has been great.
Well, here's the thing, right? You've got a Congress that's set up so that the Senate is not representative of the population purposely. It's set up to represent states, and that's why every state, whether you're California with 38 million people or Wyoming with 500,000 people, get two senators, right? So that makes it really critical that the one chamber that is set up to represent people accurately actually does that job well, right? And so the perversion of that, and it's true that there's a natural perversion in the system based on where those populations are distributed. So it's never going to be the case where you get a perfect translation of popular vote versus House proportion, because Democratic population is concentrated in a way that Republican population is not. But what's happening to it now is a perversion of the one chamber that is directly and prescriptively designed to represent people.
Yeah, and it took so much litigation even to get us in the position that we were to win the U.S. House. And everyone knew what they were doing. I mean, they said like there's no better investment in politics. This is Karl Rove himself in editorials in 2010, and he said the control of U.S. Congress will be determined by races in West Lafayette, Indiana, and he knew exactly where all the targets were. I mean,
no doubt.
So people really, I get some slack for my admiration of Karl Rove and my admiration for Republican electioneering strategy in general. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a big fan of developing long-term strategic plans and executing them, especially when your plans don't, erode or mangle democracy and advance it, So, Karl Rove's plans were a way to get around numbers and people and diminish democracy. So that it's true that those are aspects of his plans that are not to be admired. But the fact that the Republican Party comes up with plans and executes them in the long term, I think is something that Democrats really need to start considering.
Absolutely. I mean, when I would present at the same time or do interviews at the same time as my Republican counterpart at the RSLC, after the 2016 election, they looked at me and they're like, well, what did you expect? We've been punching holes in your blue wall for years.
No doubt. I mean, everything that they do is well thought out and planned. I mean, so when I talk about the difference between why Obama lost 800 seats is because that plan was hatched in 2007, and it was like, okay, let's take control. Let's have a really excellent election cycle in 2010. Let's do it by this, and this, and then let's use it to, manipulate the reapportionment process and redistrict in a way that will, crush the Democratic Party. I mean, you can't just, when your opponent is living and navigating the world like that, you can't just afford to wander through it like a Walking Dead zombie, because people are counting on you for their livelihoods and in many cases their actual lives. So it really behooves you to be answering that kind of strategic approach with your own version of it, in my opinion.
Well, I think that gives us the greatest opportunity in 2020, where it's the first time in 20 years where we've had presidential level turnout, and then also this new redistricting environment that we have to defend from.
No doubt. Yeah, I agree.
And so
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And for us, there's an opportunity, in addition to flipping the North Carolina House and Senate, there's an opportunity for us to get to single party control in Pennsylvania. We only need 9 seats in the Pennsylvania House, 4 seats in the Pennsylvania Senate. Minnesota is probably the next Democratic trifecta. The Minnesota Senate wasn't on the ballot in 2018. So we have an opportunity to flip the Minnesota State Senate. And then in Michigan, like I said, we're only 4 seats away. And making sure that we have control of the Michigan State Senate. They now have a nonpartisan redistricting commission in Michigan, but that'll protect the funding for the nonpartisan redistricting commission and make sure that Whitmer has a lever of power going into the next few years. And then having that nonpartisan redistricting commission will set us up to flip the Michigan State Senate in 2022.
That's exactly right. Because once you get that control, I mean, the Republicans have used their control to suppress voters and make the institutional design of voting in states restrictive. And Democrats should use their control as soon as that they obtain it to make voting more accessible to people and liberalize small L those voting systems. And of course, obviously, institute fair and free elections and redistricting and stuff like that. So let me ask you this then to close out, Jessica. How can people support your work at the DLCC?
Well, thanks so much for asking. They can check out dlcc.org. We also have a list of races if folks are specific in want to support candidates. They can check out dlcc.org/races, and that shows them a lot of different campaigns they could support. I also would encourage people to volunteer. There's volunteer opportunities on our website to do remote phone banking or postcarding for individual candidates. But the other thing I would say is the dollar goes so much further at our level of the ballot. And we really need folks that care about the long-term future of the Democratic Party. If you care about voting rights, if you care about redistricting, if you care about protecting reproductive choice and LGBTQ rights in the states, you care about state legislatures, and that's really where we can see progress. So we hope people will check us out on the web or on Instagram at DLCC, on Twitter at DLCC as well. So there's a lot of places that they can get engaged.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. It was awesome to hear about the work you're doing and the organization, of course, which is supported by, I'm sure, a fantastic supporting cast too. And so a shout out to all of them as well and the hard work that they're doing to help your organization be successful. And so thanks for coming and representing them today as well.
Thanks so much. We're so lucky. We have a great team at DLCC, and I'm lucky to be a part of it.
I'm sure. And I hope they can all follow me on Twitter. So
Many of them do.
All righty. So have a great day, and thanks for coming on the show.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to connect.